América Viva. On the road, talking about lived history, remarkable places, and real life.
Hello, my name is Tom Noga. I am a reporter, filmmaker, explorer. In this podcast, I talk about traveling, or I talk with a special guest about life, culture, and the world. Sometimes far away, sometimes right on our doorstep. My guest today is Maria Ulina. She's Brazilian, she has a YouTube channel, she coaches women. Is that description accurate?
Não, eu não me sinto uma coach.
No, I don't see myself as a coach. I represent a large part of Brazilian women, but not as a coach.
Brasileira, mas não como coach.
To what extent do you feel you represent Brazilian women?
Eu represento porque hoje eu tenho voz para...
I represent them because today I have a voice to speak for these women who dream, modest women with very different life stories. Many women who are trying to survive, who are trying to live. They have dreams and they want to make ends meet. Many of them, for example, never had the chance to study.
Uma renda, porém muitas delas não tiveram oportunidade de estudar, por exemplo.
You told me that the original idea behind your channel was to give advice to women who live and work in São Paulo. How do you balance private life and work in such a hectic city?
Para mim não foi difícil, porque era uma vida em São Paulo.
For me, it wasn't that difficult, even though São Paulo is a hectic city, a city that never sleeps. I worked a lot, but I also enjoyed life. After work, you meet friends, go out for a drink, or do something together on the weekend. And the nightlife in São Paulo is legendary. So I always worked, but I also had a social life.
Trabalhei, mas eu tinha vida social também.
Our topic today is São Paulo, just to put it into numbers. 12 million people in the city itself, around 22 million in the greater metropolitan area. That makes São Paulo the largest city in the Western Hemisphere. I lived there too, but only for a short time, at least compared to you. How many years did you live there?
Eu morei em São Paulo
23 years, more than half of my life.
Praticamente.
When I first came to São Paulo, the sheer size of the city completely blew me away. Already during the landing approach, you look down at a sea of skyscrapers, an endless sea. At the time, I already knew New York City and Mexico City, but São Paulo was on a completely different scale. What was your first impression when you arrived there?
A minha primeira impressão não foi diferente da sua.
My first impression wasn't any different from yours, but I think São Paulo overwhelmed me even more than it did you. At the time, I came from a small town in the countryside, a town in the state of Bahia with about 80,000 inhabitants. I was born and raised in a rural area. São Paulo completely overwhelmed me. I felt like I was in heaven. That was what I had always dreamed of. The cars, the people, the movement of the city, the buildings. In my hometown, there wasn't a single building higher than 5 stories, and here there were 20, 30 or more. Skyscrapers as far as the eye could see. It felt like I was living inside a dream.
Como se eu vivesse um sonho.
One of my friends there originally comes from the countryside of São Paulo state. He once told me about his first visit to the city as a child, when he came with his aunt or uncle. One sentence, he said, has stayed with me ever since. There was a streetcar. For him, as a small child, that was a huge thing. What stories like that do you remember?
Infelizmente, na minha época, não tinha.
Unfortunately, they no longer existed when I arrived, but I heard stories about them. How they sounded, how quiet they were compared to today, how the young men dressed up and went downtown to go out or meet girls. Everyone used the streetcars back then. They were an institution.
Eles iam de bondinho, então ficou só.
At least there was already a subway when you arrived, right?
Que foi outra coisa.
At first, the subway scared me. I only knew buses. The only means of transportation I had ever used in my life were buses and pau de arara trucks.
Pau de arara também.
Those converted flatbed trucks, where people held onto a metal bar on the back. That's why they were called pau de arara, parrot perch.
Para quem é bem do interior.
Exactly. For someone like me, coming from the deepest countryside, the noise and the crowding of the subway were frightening.
Impactante para mim.
Why did you go to São Paulo in the first place?
Porque eu fui uma criança que nasci no interior.
I come from the countryside. I literally grew up on a farm, but I was never happy there. My dream since childhood was to grow up quickly and see the world. I don't know why I felt that way. When we moved to a town, it felt like the world to me at first, but soon it became too small as well. In my mind, São Paulo was my point of reference. That was where I wanted to go, where I wanted to make my dreams come true.
You said it was your dream to go there as an adult, to discover the adult world, but you actually moved there as a teenager, right?
Exatamente. Eu fui para São Paulo com 14 anos, mas eu já era sonhadora.
Exactly. I moved to São Paulo when I was 14, but even then I was already a dreamer. At 10 years old, I dreamed of being an adult. I didn't play with the other kids. I wanted to see the world and earn my own money. So at 14, I already had a strong sense of responsibility, very different from today's generation. At 14, I was naive, innocent, a girl from the countryside, but my thoughts were flying elsewhere. I wanted to decide my own life.
E eu também tinha muita responsabilidade.
What was the city's appeal for you at the beginning, during those first days, weeks, and months?
O encanto era tudo, porque tudo tinha uma dimensão muito grande.
Everything, because everything was bigger, on a different scale. The streets were beautiful to me. They were clean, wide, with trees, full of possibilities. Many of those possibilities I couldn't access at 14, but I knew they existed. For example, that's when I went to the movies for the first time. I felt enchanted, like I was living in a fairy tale.
Então, tudo para mim me encantava, era como se eu vivesse em um conto de fadas.
My first visit to São Paulo was around the same time you moved there. I remember seeing many street children, especially around Praça da Sé, and makeshift huts in green areas along roads and highways. How did you experience São Paulo back then in that respect?
Sim, não exatamente assim, do jeito que você conheceu.
Yes, but not exactly the way you experienced it. São Paulo is enormous and full of people from everywhere. Many, like me, came from the Northeast, hoping to find work and a better life. But those who don't find work often end up on the streets, homeless. There are also people from other South American countries who came looking for a better future and didn't find it, and now live on the streets. There are drifters, drug addicts, and people whose families fell apart for one reason or another, or who struggle with health issues, especially mental health. Praça da Sé, in the city center, is actually a beautiful square, but unfortunately dirty and unsafe. Because the area is full of people around the clock, it also attracts those who take advantage of that, thieves, junkies, gangs. That's what makes it ugly and dangerous.
De drogas. Então, fica feio e ainda existe isso, lamentavelmente, em São Paulo.
São Paulo reminded me of something I'd already noticed in New York City when I first visited there. I had expected the city to be super sexy, like you said, a city that never sleeps. New York especially has that image. Beautiful people, great places, hip bars, a life that feels almost cinematic, or at least rock and roll. But I didn't really find that, neither in New York nor later in São Paulo. Instead, I sensed a kind of underlying fear, a very hectic way of life. And I even found it a bit boring, more like a daily struggle, the opposite of sexy.
Assim que eu cheguei em São Paulo, foi o maior impacto para mim foi isso, porque como
When I arrived in São Paulo, I was also shocked, partly because I came from a small town where people seemed different, happier, people know each other, smile more, say good morning, good afternoon, the basics. That doesn't exist in São Paulo. The city is considered cold, and it really is. I also adopted some of that coldness. Life there is like a hamster wheel. You run and run just to survive, waking up early, working all day, getting home late. São Paulo is so large that commuting 2 or 3 hours one way is not unusual. That drains you. Everyone is stressed and irritated, and at some point the city loses its shine. And then there's the constant danger. Eventually, you become afraid of everything. That's how it was for me too, to the point where someone wishes me good morning, and I'm surprised because I don't know them, and I wonder what they want from me. All of this makes people cold and closed off.
E tem vários fatores, violência também, e aí as pessoas vão ficando frias, contraídas.
Have you ever been mugged?
Se eu não me engano,
3 times, if I'm not mistaken.
Que eu fui assaltada.
That's strange for me. As a European, I walk the streets without fear. Of course, we also have rough neighborhoods where you might avoid going at night, but there isn't this constant sense of danger. That's very different from South America in general and Brazil in particular. What does it feel like to be robbed?
Eu acredito que por isso também um pouco da frieza em São Paulo, porque todos vivem com medo, ninguém...
I think one reason for the coldness in São Paulo is that you can't trust anyone. Everyone is afraid, constantly looking over their shoulder, and people don't care about each other. The last time I was robbed, it happened completely out of nowhere, on a busy street at 7 in the evening, just 300 meters from my home. It looked like a normal couple on the street. You'd think they were lovers. And they robbed me and 3 of my aunts, at gunpoint. It was horrible. I had already handed over my things before they even demanded them. I was used to it and stayed calm. But one of my aunts reacted differently. She screamed, said she wouldn't give up her belongings. In the end, she did. It felt like an eternity, but I think it lasted less than a minute. Thank God they only took our valuables and left us alive.
Mas graças a Deus eles levaram tudo, mas nos deixaram com vida.
I once interviewed the writer Ana Paula Maia. She's Carioca from Rio de Janeiro. She wrote a great book about Rio, and she told me a story very similar to yours. She was mugged just a few meters from her home, if I remember correctly, in Botafogo. After that, she left Rio. She couldn't live there anymore.
Para mim não foi diferente. Quando eu cheguei em São Paulo, como eu falei, eu era apaixonada.
For me, it was similar. When I came to São Paulo, I was in love with the city, but over time, I had many bad experiences. Eventually, I had enough of São Paulo, the violence, the robberies, all of it. That's what led me to end my chapter in São Paulo. But you have to remember, São Paulo is not just bad. I always say São Paulo is made up of different worlds, cities within the city. It's extremely divided by social class. There are very poor areas, very poor neighborhoods. Sometimes it feels unreal. Many people live in shacks along polluted rivers, in small houses made of wood and cardboard. The rivers are contaminated with sewage. It's a sad life, especially for children. And then there's the very wealthy side of São Paulo. São Paulo is good for those who have a lot of money, because if you have money, you can buy quality of life and safety.
Porque se você tem dinheiro, você pode ter qualidade de vida e segurança.
An American film director once told me something very similar, Susan Seidelman. She made films about New York in the 1980s, great films, and later directed the pilot episode of Sex and the City. She said, New York is really only for young or wealthy people. Does that idea that it's a city for the young also apply to São Paulo?
Eu acredito exatamente isso.
Exactly. São Paulo is for young people who have dreams, ambition, who are mentally organized and know what they want. If you're not rich, not a millionaire, São Paulo can still be good for personal growth. But you have to be very smart not to lose your way, not to fall for easy money, not to get involved with drugs. You need focus. You need to work, save money, build a life, and then either leave or become rich enough to live in the good neighborhoods of the city.
Também funciona muito bem.
I had a similar experience when I lived in São Paulo. At the time, I lived in the Copan building, the Niemeyer building, right in the city center. There, I met an entrepreneur who sold medical equipment. His office was just across from the campus, only a few minutes away on foot, and he lived in a penthouse on the top floor with a spectacular view over the entire city. I found that lifestyle fascinating. Very urban on the one hand, but at the same time, Copan is almost like a neighborhood of its own, with the bar downstairs, Floresta, and many restaurants. Basically a quarter where you constantly run into your neighbors.
A maioria da minha vida em São Paulo eu morei na Zona Norte, Vila Maria, que é bairro ali considerado classe média.
For most of my life in São Paulo, I lived in Zona Norte, in Vila Maria, a middle-class neighborhood. It's very safe, clean, with wide streets, a good area. But I also lived in distant suburbs, with a completely different reality, one that feels like another world, as if you were no longer in São Paulo at all. As I said, São Paulo consists of several cities and centers within the larger city. Many suburbs have their own rules, and the farther you go from the center, the more isolated, suburban, and poorer the neighborhoods become. In these areas, the donos are in charge, the donos da boca, as we call them in Brazil.
Os donos ali, como eles falam, os donos da boca no ditado popular brasileiro.
The local drug bosses, rather gang leaders. The term comes from boca de fumo, drug selling points. The donos da boca are the men who control those spots.
Eles mandam e ditam as regras, e realmente
they give the orders and set the rules, and those who live there must follow them. The main rule is to be blind, deaf, and mute. No matter what happens, you see nothing, hear nothing, say nothing. You mind your own business and live your normal life, then nothing happens to you. On the contrary, if you're in trouble, the donos will help you, but only if you're blind, deaf and mute.
Mas você tem que ser cego, surdo e mudo.
How do people feel about that?
Ninguém gosta. Pesadelo.
Nobody likes this. It's a nightmare. It's horrible. I only lived in such a place because I was forced to. At the time, I had no other choice. I believe that's true for everyone who lives there, because there is no quality of life. For children, it's terrible. The mother goes to work, the father too, if he's even present. The children are alone. They go to school alone. When they come home, no one is there. No one cooks for them. In these neighborhoods, there are very few opportunities. And there's bad influence everywhere. Parents commute 2 hours to work, 2 hours back, or more. That means they come home and find their children already asleep. Often they leave in the morning before the children wake up. What kind of family life is that?
A vida para a família do bem.
I'd like to talk to you about a personal impression of mine. I first came to São Paulo around the same time you moved there, and in the years that followed, I kept returning to Brazil. Not every year, but many times. My impression was that things improved significantly, especially in the years after the turn of the millennium. There seemed to be less poverty, at least less visible poverty, less violence, more order overall, cleaner cities. Civic awareness felt stronger. Did you perceive that in São Paulo as well back then?
Eu acredito que as coisas estavam melhorando.
That's true. Things did improve. But in recent years, in my opinion, the situation has gotten much worse again. More violence, more poverty, growing inequality. On top of that, many girls become mothers at a very young age. They end up as single mothers and fall into the cycle of poverty.
Absolutely. I experienced something similar. In the 2000s and 10s, I was in Rio de Janeiro very often, sometimes 2 or 3 times a year. And from visit to visit, I noticed more homeless people, not just individuals, but couples living on the streets, entire families living on the streets. The poverty seemed to return, the kind of poverty I had experienced very strongly during my first visit to Brazil, in São Paulo. And there was this hard-to-describe feeling that something in Brazil was going downhill. You'd pass certain places and think, okay, I should probably leave quickly. Things have really worsened over the past decade. And last year, when I was there again, in São Paulo and also in Rio, the impression was the same. It seems to be getting worse right now.
Na minha época, como eu vim do interior e a maioria das pessoas que eu conheciam, nós como crianças
in my time, especially in the countryside, we children helped our parents. I helped on our farm. That doesn't happen anymore. Many children grow up without rules or responsibilities, especially in the suburbs. They want easy money. That's another reason crime is increasing. Social media also plays a role, unfortunately not for learning, but mostly as a distraction with music and random videos. Many young people still live with their parents at 25 or 30. Well, I don't think that's good.
Então isso eu acho que tem tudo a ver.
Maybe this also has to do with the situation in big cities. Housing is expensive, many young people can't afford it anymore or can only afford a single room in a shared apartment. I live in Cologne. That's completely normal here. I also know this from Spain, where I have relatives. A large percentage of young people still live with their parents because they simply can't afford their own place. Maybe that's also part of the problem in São Paulo, right?
Pode, mas eu tô falando mesmo é de responsabilidade.
That may be true, but that's not what I mean. I'm talking about taking responsibility for your own life. Of course, young people can live with their parents. In Brazil, culturally, that's very common, especially in an expensive city like São Paulo. But at some point, you have to leave your parents' home, start a family, live your own life.
Da casa, por exemplo. Então é sobre isso.
We've talked a lot about the negative sides of São Paulo, maybe more than we should have. But São Paulo is still a fascinating city, isn't it?
Yes, very much so.
So, if we imagine someone who wants to visit São Paulo, could you give them a few tips? What should you absolutely do in this city?
Para mim, São Paulo imperdível é a culinária.
For me, food in São Paulo is a must. São Paulo is an international metropolis, and there's also enormous cultural diversity within Brazil itself. The food, good food, the food in bars, the Mercado de São Paulo, where you can try pastéis de feira. For me, that's essential. For me, it's one of the best places in the world because you can find everything you can imagine, luxury and simplicity, street food, and international cuisine. Anyone coming from abroad will be enchanted by the colors, the food, the smells, the joy of Brazilians and their hospitality. And because São Paulo never sleeps, you can do things around the clock, eat, listen to good music, dance. There are many great places, like Ibirapuera Park. You can rent a bike, go cycling, have a picnic. São Paulo is truly enchanting and has so much to offer.
Você pode fazer piquenique. Então, São Paulo é realmente encantador e tem muita coisa boa.
And with that, we've reached the end of this podcast. Thank you very much for being here, Maria.
Foi prazer.
It was a pleasure.
That's it for today, dear listeners. If you're listening to this podcast on YouTube or Spotify, you'll find links below or in the description to my other podcasts. Thanks for being with us. Until next time. Ciao, this was Tom Noga.